Namaste. On behalf of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar Open University, Department of English, we welcome you all for this BA program on discipline specific elective course. It consists of 5 credits, and today we are going to have an overview of women writing in English. Along with us, we have an eminent resource person, Professor Sushila Kaushik ma'am from Delhi University, who is having vast experience not only in women writing but also in different genres of University Grants Commission. She was the co-chair for University Grants Commission program on capacity building for women managers in higher education. Under her stewardship, we have SAM programs, which is sensitization, awareness and motivation for the higher studies. Along with that, lot of people are trained in the universities for training of trainers and master trainers they became, where there is an impact of higher education, where we can see women becoming leaders, specifically as an academic leaders. So, with this few introduction, I welcome Professor Sushila Kaushik ma'am for this video recording. Thank you ma'am for coming here. Let us start what is the reason why we are doing this program on women writing? Is there any necessity? Why it is important for us to read women writing? Coming to National Education Policy 2020, people are emphasizing on multidisciplinary approach. So, women writing is not only from an academic discipline, but we see it in social, political and economic aspects as well. So, it is a multidisciplinary course where people can understand it's not like only women have to read that, but it is also important for all sections of the society to understand women studies, women writing, and awareness is the need of the hour. With these few words, I will give a very brief introduction about our 5 credit course. Our course title is Women Writing in English, and it consists of 5 blocks. The first block, I request all the students, if you are from B.R. Ambedkar Open University, this is BA English course in the 3rd year, 5th semester, and the title is Women's Writing in English. It consists of 5 blocks, and the first block is Women and Writing, second block is Subverting the Canon, third block is Intersectionalities, and the fourth one is Feminist Thought, and the last but not the least, the 5th block is the Contemporary, whatever that is happening in the society. Why I am trying to give this bird's eye view is, if you are from our university, kindly go through with the textbook. We are just giving the bird's eye view of what happened in the pre-independence and what is happening after the independence. So, post-independent writings in different genres, whether it can be a story, it can be a novel or a part of fiction, everything is covered in this in a bird's eye view. Once you go on with the studies or once you start reading this course, you will be able to understand what kind of writings happened in India as well as in the world. So, with these few words, I once again welcome our Professor Sushila Kaushik ma'am, and now the conversation begins with this, like why we have so many women writing in different languages, because now we are speaking on subaltern studies where the margins are coming into center. So, with these few points, I am trying to start the conversation. What kind of women writings happened in general? Professor Kaushik, can you please give an introduction or focus on why women writing in general is important in the literature as well as society?
First let me thank Madhuri, old friend of mine, long time back. We met together in the program she mentioned, and she is one of the capable women managers we trained and is occupying the position now, which is a success for our program, UGC program, long back. I'm also congratulating her because she is talking about women's studies in literature, which is not a very new subject, but there are a lot of universities which have introduced women's writing or women's studies in the English literature. But as we go through, we deal with certain issues which we need to think about. I've gone through the syllabi, I've gone through the listing she has given. It reflects one of the most important aspects of women's studies. Namely, women's studies is a multidisciplinary study. Though by itself it's a separate study, it gets into all the other subjects we do, especially in social sciences, in literature, in humanities, in arts, and now we see them even in science. With a person like Williams living there in the space for such a long time and delayed a little bit more, we keep questioning what will happen to her. So, the women becomes important even in space and science. So, with the result, if one has to write about or read about women in writing in literature, invariably we get into various types of questions which arise regarding the women's position, women's status, women's rights, women's living lifestyle in the various parts of the world as such. Women is in a way a very homogeneous community. All over the world they share many common problems. At the same time, women are also a specific community in a country like India, which has a lot more issues than the women in the West have. So, how exactly do we incorporate these issues in our writing? How exactly we teach them in our learning process? That is an issue which I'll like to focus on, Madhuri. I see in your syllabi almost every one of them talking about various issues. We will come to that later on. Right now, we talk about what women have been writing, particularly in our country, but a little bit in the context of the Western countries. You know very well, Madhuri, the women's issues really started in the public forum in the West, in academic forum in the West. It is the women in the academics of the West who began writing books on women's issues, the theoretical books, the practical questions, etc., etc. They were the ones who raised the whole issue of rights, freedom, especially in countries like the West Asian countries. We have a lot of very powerful writers, women writers, emerging in Iran and other countries, the developing countries, which brought into focus and made it very necessary for us to include these writings in our academic subject. So, with that, women in writing then becomes a very important one. We in the academic circle, this is a vehicle with which we mirror the society, and learning is another process by which we try to change the society in favor of women and women's rights. So, women's writing being an important one, we must know whether Indian women have began writing, when did they begin writing, what did they write, whether we can categorize them in various ways. I think some of your themes really reflect on these things. I don't know, you know that mainly women in India, women participated plenty in the freedom movement. They became big spokespersons for women's rights. There were a lot of men also who went along with them. You have Raja Ram Mohan Roy and others who began talking about women and their rights. But in the 1990s, when we were in the middle of the freedom movement, 1950, 60, a lot of women emerged in the leadership. And they reflect on the women's issues, women's education, women's equality, women's employment, women moving out of the house. There was no dowry issue. All these things came up at that time. But the women, so you have the first writers, women writers who write on women in India emerged in the post-independent period, and we have writings from Devaki Jain, Neera Desai, Veena Mazumdar, and many others. on how the leadership figured in the freedom movement and what all the rights they worked about. So, the early writings were on that, but little later other types of writings came up and we began talking in terms of later needs and third party experiences, other issues like others' experiences bringing out, but they were mostly traditional. They were very, very stereotyped. In the beginning, we had a lot of novelists, a lot of women writers working on stories, and but the stories and the women characters there and the society they came out was much more traditional, stereotyped. So, they gave a pleasure in reading, but they did not have a reformist content about them as such. So, you find much and so many leaders were there, but there is no biography in India. All these women leaders who worked during national movement, Sucheta Kriplani, Sarojini Naidu and Kamala Devi Chattopadhyaya and many others who are women leaders, very few writings exist about their life, about their experiences, about their feelings, about their challenges, how they try to overcome it and things like that. So, more and more biographies of that period are needed even now, and lot of historical writings are still needed, and by way of knowing about what they do. This is one aspect about our writings which we have to think about. But as we speak along, I don't know, Madhuri, you want to talk about any other issues on there?
Yes, ma'am.
As we went along, we then find more and more women begin working on it, writing on this, academics coming out of it. I will stop with this, Madhuri. I want to know your opinion on it. I think the most important landmark in India is academic and official and policy making is the publication of Towards Equality, the Status of Women Commission report. And that, though that was a social science attempt, it brought in a very wide reaction all over India, and the most important reaction was more and more women began working on women's issues, more and more women began doing in academics research, and more movements began to be created. And so, this brought about a broader movement, broader consciousness, and not merely only those women who were in social science, but other women also began to be interested. So, this is the movement from where the writings started. Women's writing started, women's data began coming out, and the subsequent writings reflected a lot of it. I don't know, Madhuri, whether you agree with that, that Towards Equality is a foundation for a lot of writings in India, apart from social movements.
Yes, ma'am. As rightly pointed out by Professor Kaushik, while dealing with the different kinds of inequalities in the society, we are trying to make a kind of a platform where we can see different kind of issues specifically from a women perspective. What kind of stereotypical thinking is there? Is there any requirement? Because when you look back, a lot of things are emerging in the recent times. At the same time, when you see the stereotypical understanding of the society, what kind of stereotypes are there, whether it is rooted in the patriarchy or it has got its own tentacles. Let us go with our textbook, because in between I want to have the hands-on experience for the student where exactly this is located. This lesson is completely for the student perspective as well as to the other people, because we wanted to make it interesting, while the listener or the viewer wanted to have a very clear idea of women writing. We are just giving a bird's eye view. At the same time, in the page number 60, as I rightly pointed out, I am repeating, it is for the discipline specific elective. The topic is women writing in English, and this is unit 5, breaking the stereotypes. How, what kind of themes we are discussing here? The first is, it is about questioning the male canon. What kind of questions that we are asking? What exactly the canon means? What kind of information we get from the canon? Let me have few words from our own textbook. Canons are formed in different genres and literature in different periods. One of the ways in which canons are formed is through the establishment of certain writers as important literary figures through their inclusion in literary anthologies. The publication of anthology of poetry began in erstwhile in the 18th century. I just gave tip of the iceberg because you can go through the same thing giving lot of information. You will be learning lot of information about the canon, how it started, what kind of, how it is different from the male canon. I mean, what exactly the question of the male canon, because we have to see from a different perspective to understand women's writing and beyond the canon. Okay. So, coming back to our experiences of not only South Asian, specifically from an Indian perspective, we are trying to understand the social, political and economic aspects also are very, very important. Again, this is not only from the literature point of view, but also from the multidisciplinary approach we are trying to understand. Black women writing or black women's writing, we can see whether you can start with Toni Morrison or Alice Walker or the writers who gave lot of importance for the what kind of writings they have written. The first is, it starts with an colonial perspective or colonial experience they have, and the triple jeopardy. What is triple jeopardy? It is a slave to a slave. Being a female, they are slave to the men, and again being black, they are slave to the slave. So, that is what we call as triple jeopardy. It is clearly visible in the black women writing, which is a path breaking in the 1950s Black is Beautiful movement. So, coming back to South Indian context, before the independence, lot of women are in the front when it comes to the freedom struggle. Same time, documentation was not done properly because of various historical and political reasons. So, now we can see women writing are coming out with their own lived experiences. So, I request our esteemed resource person Professor Kaushik ma'am to give a view about what kind of experiences are important for the women for the documentation, what kind of experiences were there before independence and even after, and what kind of changes we can see in the lived experiences of women.
Two types, Madhuri. One is, though we have writings by women or even by men on women's issues, we have to still keep asking a question. Is it only question of writing on women, or writing on women with an input of feminist studies? So, the feminism, the feminist concern, feminist way of looking at things and feminist perspectives, are they emerging out of these writings, or are they writings only on women or by women? This is something which I think we have to question, we have to peruse our literature. The second thing to answer you about documentation, I have also little information on black history. The black women used to recite poems or do lullabies and all of them were full of their experiences. In India too, lot of lullabies, lot of songs which they do, or when they grind a rice or they grind a masala, the women used to sing all the time, they do not do it in silence. Historically, a lot of women have done this, they have taken these rural hymns and rural songs, and collectively when the women join up together, 4 or 5 of them, they never work quietly, they always sing together. How many of these songs really are only bhajans or something, or how many of these songs really reflect the social life which they had? A lot of them did. A lot of them did, a lot of them were even anti-men, and bringing out the sufferings which the women had and letting out the pent up emotions and depressions which they had. So, these type of things in the beginning, we in the 1990s we started it, some of them really put them down, documented them, but then it stopped. I think we require a lot more of documentation of it, and many of our movies, especially those which are produced by people like Shyam Benegal, movie like Manthan, they do come out with these poems and the songs and the village folks joining up together. Those are things which should be also taken up and documented, because then we know what are the women's experiences and how they try to overcome it, how they survived it, how they face the patriotic challenges together as a collectivity. So, this is one field which we need. Secondly, a lot of literature came out, especially in regional languages in India, and most of us read English, most of us read the Western women, we read the Western writings, especially theoretical versions of women's studies, but very few of us have really brought out what has been there and what is emerging in the regional languages, especially Urdu, Hindi and Kannada. These are all languages and movies where a lot of these women's experiences have been coming out, emerging. So, this is somewhere we have to do the little bit. The English literature will have to perhaps quote the regional and cite them, because most of us do in our academics only in English and women's writing in English, not so much in other languages. So, that is why we have to analyze and learn a little bit or hear a little bit or learn a little bit about what we call women's studies, as again women as such. We distinguish this women's studies, women's question, and just generally on literature on women or by women. So, this is extremely important, and because that is what will lead to a critical faculty, a questioning of by the students, which leads in turn their understanding of the society and overcoming the challenges. And to overcome challenges, we require both men and women, the male students as well as female students. So, this university system is the best way of particularly reaching to men, male students as such. So, I do not know the recent writings, there is a plenty of writing now emerging in 2000 and afterwards. They reflect this sort of emerging women and their opinions and their experiences. We have a lot of women, self-empowered women, educated women, professional women, self-employed women, working class women. So, those experiences either by themselves, by narrating it. So, the oral history becomes oral narratives become a very important one. The labor women, the working class women, the village women, the agricultural women, the rural women, their experiences, their contribution, which cannot be straight away in written form, but mostly in the form of either songs or proverbs or oral narratives. I think that should become a part of our writings. So, the educated women will have to reach out to them and then convert it or translate it and transcribe it as a document in written form. We now find even empowered women in scientific fields, in political field, their experiences need to be done. There are a lot of women coming out in politics, there are a lot of women coming out of it a little later. We have seen a lot of professional women getting into. We have seen the whole issue of what is happening in Kerala movies, where women went in with a professional feeling, professional hopes, and they have now come out with their experiences openly. These need to be documented. You keep it documented and confidential, or keep it this came out openly only because of the two movements we had, Me Too movement, I Will Speak movement, where they came out by saying about the rape, molestation, what they have gone through, and other types of professional challenges they had to go through in order to somehow reach. We know the persons who reach the top, they are popular, they are known, but what they had to do in order to reach the top, their experiences, is something which need to be documented. Then how did they face the challenges? How they face the challenges is something which is to be written out. So, that is precisely where literature has to come down to ordinary women's lives, ordinary women, and find out their experience. Either you write, most of them do that, and many of them really put it down as narrative or novel, characters in the novel, or perhaps in the first person, and first person's oral narrative. We did it for the freedom movement. Many historians have done it in India, met the women who participated in the freedom movement and got it as a oral narrative. I myself did it once, very, very interesting. But and she came out with what challenges they had, what issues they faced. In the same way, we must do it even now. The women's writing in English means those who have a good English command, who can write well, who can put things together, should go down to these women and get their thing. So it's both interesting. It will be a very new venture, but at the same time, it helps in understanding the social problems. There are, of course, some new type of things emerging. We should deal with those issues. I don't know, Madhuri, do you agree, because you are a literary person?
Yes,
you are a literature person. You
Yes,
think the present scholars
Yes,
will move out of the university walls and reach the women outside to get all these various raw materials,
yes, ma'am.
with which they can then do more of writing.
Yeah.
Also search out for those who have worked out that writing, because I find between academic literature and the movies have gone far away. They have done far reaching stuff. They have brought in many of them into picture. We haven't yet moved that far.
As a part of discussion, we started with what exactly the women writing is and how different women from different strategies or different societies, they came here and they started to do their work in a very, very substantial way. So we started with the general to specific, coming from what kind of stereotypes we have, what is the canon, how the question of male canon has come here, and why it is important to see from general to specific, because we started with general to understand what is happening in the society, how it is reflected in the literature, whether it can be a piece of a poem or it can be a story or a novel, but the perspective of women are completely different from the male's perspective. Keeping this in view, this course is designed to make the students to understand not only from one perspective, but different perspectives are discussed and lot of anxieties are there in the society in different stratas. So how to question that, how to make the student more aware of the society, whatever happening around that, that should be reflected not only in their certificates but also in their personal life. So personal and professional together we can see in our course. It is reflecting National Education Policy 2020 multidisciplinary approach. Women writing deals with social, political, economic and cultural aspects. It is not only in the language part but also in literature and as well as in the folklore. So it is coming from different varieties, different views, different perspectives, and it is a melting pot, we can call it. So with these few words, I am very happy that this course will be interesting to all the student in this present scenario. Thank you so much for listening and understanding our concepts. Thank you.